Shalom and good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem. And in today's top stories, tensions between Iran and Israel are seemingly on the rise as a travel advisory warns of an imminent Iranian threat against Israelis visiting Turkey. Defense Minister Benny Gantz proclaims in response to an Iranian uptick of threats that Israeli security forces always knew how to protect the state of Israel and its citizens. The United States intends to disregard the IAEA's warnings over Tehran's retaliatory measures. It will strike a fatal blow to the 2015 nuclear agreement within less than 3 to 4 weeks. Tensions between Iran and Israel are seemingly on the rise as repeated Iranian losses in an exchange of covert blows as part of the Israeli so-called campaign between the wars, have turned Tehran's ire into desperate efforts to settle a score by performing acts of terror against civilian Israeli targets abroad. Consequently, Jerusalem's National Security Council elevated its travel advisory for Turkey to the highest possible alert level amid coordinated efforts between the Turkish and Israeli intelligence agencies to frustrate an Iranian cell which managed to penetrate the city of Istanbul for the purpose of kidnapping or murdering Israeli civilians.
בעקבות אירועי השבועות האחרונים בטורקיה ואחרי סדרה של ניסיונות לפיגועי טרור איראנים כלפי ישראלים שיצאו לנופש באיסטנבול, אנחנו קוראים לישראלים, אל תטוסו לאיסטנבול, ואם אין לכם צורך חיוני, אל תטוסו לטורקיה. אם אתם כבר עכשיו באיסטנבול, תחזרו לישראל בהקדם האפשרי. ארגוני הביטחון הישראלי, משרד החוץ, משרד ראש הממשלה, כולנו שותפים בשבועות האחרונים למאמץ אדיר שהציל חיי ישראלים. חלק מהם חזרו לארץ ומסתובבים בינינו בלי לדעת שחייהם ניצלו. אירועי הטרור האלה הם כלפי ישראלים שנסעו לחופש. הם בוחרים באופן אקראי אבל מכוון אזרחים ישראלים כדי לחטוף אותם או לרצוח אותם. זה יכול ליפול על כל אחד. זו סכנה אמיתית ומיידית. אם תכננתם טיסה לאיסטנבול, תבטלו. אין חופשה ששווה את החיים שלכם ואת החיים של היקרים לכם.
Foreign Minister Lapid further acknowledged Turkey's efforts to protect Israelis vacationing on its territory and voiced hope that Iran's cynical use of Turkish territory against Israelis would be uprooted in the near future.
תקשיבו להנחיות שאנחנו מוציאים, אנחנו מעדכנים את ההנחיות כל הזמן בהתאם להערכת המצב. אני מבקש להודות מפה לממשלת טורקיה על המאמץ שהם משקיעים להגנה על חיי אזרחים ישראלים. התיירות לטורקיה חשובה לשתי המדינות, אבל גם הם מבינים שיש סיכונים שאסור לקחת. אנחנו מקווים ומאמינים שההזרה הזו לא תהיה לטווח ארוך, זו עונת התיירות. נעשה כל מאמץ להביא תוך זמן קצר לרגיעה ביטחונית שתאפשר לישראלים לשוב לטורקיה וליהנות מכל מה שיש לה להציע. עד אז ההזרה בעינה עומדת, ואני קורא לכל מי שתכנן טיסה למצוא יעדים אחרים.
It is important to explain that Tehran authorities are convinced that Jerusalem was behind the death of 2 Iranian scientists in the past month. According to Iranian sources who were quoted by the New York Times on condition of anonymity, the 2 Iranian victims of alleged poisoning were Ayub Entezari, an aeronautical engineer who worked for a military research center, and Kemran Agamolai, a geologist who worked at the nuclear reactor in Natanz. Both were found dead by Tehran's revolutionary forces. Moreover, another 2 Iranians, Ali Khamenei and Mohammed Abdus, identified members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards who were reportedly involved in arms shipments to Hezbollah in Lebanon, were also found dead earlier this week. Meanwhile, apparently ashamed by the vulnerability of its operatives, a regime report classified both deaths as vehicular fatalities. Nevertheless, Iran International, a Saudi-funded network with links to the Iranian opposition, rejected the alleged cause of death of the 2 IRGC operatives as false. Regardless, the IRGC naturally blames Israel for the latest string of its operatives' fatalities, and while keen on revenge, Jerusalem has a clear message for Tehran.
אני רוצה להעביר מפה גם מסר לאיראנים. מי שיפגע בישראלים לא ינקה. ידה הארוכה של ישראל תשיג אותו, לא משנה איפה הוא יהיה.
Echoing the foreign minister's warning, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz during a special ceremony honoring reserve soldiers who excelled in the line of duty, stressed the Israeli defense establishment's confident resolve in confronting the uptick of Iranian threats.
כולנו גם רואים את התוקפנות הגוברת של איראן, ואנחנו אומרים שכוחות הביטחון תמיד ידעו להגן על מדינת ישראל ואזרחיה מול כל איום ולתת מענה לכל פגיעה בהם. כך היה וכך יהיה גם בעתיד.
Jerusalem's top defense official continued by highlighting the Israeli defense establishment's relentless efforts to maintain the fitness of IDF reserve troops to ensure continuous preparedness, all the while deepening cooperation with the United States and Jerusalem's regional partners.
המשימה הראשונה שלנו במערכת הביטחון היא להבטיח את כשירותכם כפי שעשינו לאורך השנים האחרונות והשנה האחרונה באימונים וכפי שעשינו באופן חסר תקדים בתרגיל האחרון וכפי שאני מניח ויודע שנמשיך לעשות גם בתקופה הקרובה. אנחנו רואים את מרחב האיומים משתנה ומתעצם במגוון חזיתות ולכן אנחנו פועלים באופן משמעותי לבניין הכוח של צה"ל ושל כל זרועות הביטחון לצד הגדלת שיתופי הפעולה שלנו עם ארצות הברית, בעלת בריתנו החשובה ביותר, ועם מדינות נוספות באזור.
It is interesting to know that while U.S. President Joe Biden had previously acknowledged his intentions to travel to Saudi Arabia as part of a regional tour that is expected to include Israel, the American leader noted earlier this week that the trip to the Arabian Kingdom was not yet finalized, while further revealing that its core purpose is related to Israeli security rather than circulating reports linking the anticipated visit to Washington's aspirations for Riyadh to increase its oil production that would consequently lower global energy prices.
Sir, whether to go to Saudi Arabia?
No, not yet.
What would be the holding up the decision at this point? Are there commitments you're waiting for from the Saudis or on the negotiations over peace talks?
The commitments from the Saudis don't relate to anything having to do with energy. It happens to be a larger meeting taking place in Saudi Arabia. That's the reason I'm going. And it has to do with national security for them, for Israelis. I have a program, anyway. It has to do with much larger issues than having to do with the energy.
U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price addressed President Biden's looming trip to the Middle East during his last press briefing and cited that Washington-Riyadh engagements will continue so long as they serve American interests.
Our engagements with countries around the world are predicated on the idea that these relationships need to serve American interests and to be consistent with American values. I think over the course of the past 16 months, we have been in a position to forge a relationship with Saudi Arabia that does that.
Price failed to mention that the referred to hundreds of cross-border attacks were directed by the Islamic Republic of Iran, which regards the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as its arch-Islamic rival in the volatile region. Separately, while IAEA Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi clearly warned that within 3 to 4 weeks, efforts to revive the 2015 nuclear agreement with Iran would sustain a fatal blow, the United States is poised on disregarding this warning altogether. Speaking aboard Air Force One, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan noted, quote, "We see the issue of the IAEA compliance by Iran with its safeguards agreement, with its obligations at the NPT, and its negotiations with Grossi, particularly on the files that Grossi has expressed concerns about and that the board is speaking to today, as operating on one track. On another track is a negotiated resolution to Iran's nuclear program through a compliance for compliance return to the JCPOA." Biden's national security advisor further highlighted that from the administration's perspective, quote, "We have to view these on separate tracks, and that's how we're going to proceed. What actually happens in those negotiations is something we will see. But there is, in our view, a deal on the table that would effectuate a compliance-for-compliance return to the JCPOA without dealing with extraneous issues. That deal is available to Iran. They should take it. If they don't, that's on them. It is important to point out that since the IAEA Board of Governors adopted the resolution rebuking the Islamic Republic of Iran last week, Tehran's foreign exchange rates plunged to a historical low. Nevertheless, during a joint press briefing with visiting Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi proclaimed the crippling international sanctions against his country to serve as an opportunity as Tehran and Caracas signed a 20-year cooperation agreement.
تحریم‌ها و تهدیدها علیه ملت ایران در این 40 و چند ساله فراوان بوده، اما ملت ایران تصمیم گرفته که این تحریم‌ها رو برای خودش فرصتی قلمداد بکنه در جهت پیشرفت کشور.
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. It is important for us to underscore that TV7 Israel is a donation-based ministry. Therefore, if you're blessed by our productions, please consider making a financial contribution that in turn will enable us to sustain our ongoing operations. Separately, I would like to encourage you, pray for our persecuted brothers and sisters worldwide, in addition to our unceasing prayers for the peace of Jerusalem and the salvation of Israel. I'm Jonathan Hassan wishing you an Erev Mevorach, and we will see you again tomorrow at the same time.
Alfa